Dave Seeley illustrated a number of the covers for the Del Rey releases, from the MedStar duology to Timothy Zahn's Outbound Flight. But his first two assignments were for Aaron Allston's Enemy Lines duology. Seeley worked as an architect for 10 years before switching to illustration in 1995, and his works combine traditional and digital media. He often creates the work digitally first and then later goes over top with oil paints. Enemy Lines, Rebel Stand made it to number 13 on the New York Times paperback bestseller list for the week of June 16th, 2002. For Rebel Stand, I remembered the revelations about Lord Nyax, but not all the buildup that came before. And in spite of the fact that Han and Leia are prominently featured on the cover, I had forgotten every aspect of their subplot. So, a brief summary. As Wedge Antilles and his forces continue to hold Borleias against Czulkang Lah's fleet, Han Solo and Leia Organa set off on a series of missions for the newborn rebel movement. But on Coruscant, the joint Wraith Squadron/Jedi team uncovers a new threat in the New Republic's former capital. As Rebel Stand opens, we're presented with the beginning of a number of subplots. Jaina Solo and her twin Sun Squadron remain on Borleias and remain under the command of Wedge Antilles, well aware that the Yuuzhan Vong are still actively trying to capture her. Luke Skywalker, Mara Jade, Tahiri, Vela, and the members of Wraith Squadron are now inserted on Coruscant and have started their mission to scout out what is happening to the world and to try to make contact with the survivors left behind. Han Solo and Leia Organa prepare to set off on a mission for Wedge's rebel movement within the shattered remains of the New Republic. And Tam Elgrin, the former Yuuzhan Vong spy, awakens in the medical bay to learn that he's still alive and he has to now live with what he did and also try to get people to trust him again. The Coruscant mission takes up an awful lot of the book and is a huge focus here. We'll put a pin in that and return to it for my issue section, but it's very interesting to see how much Coruscant has changed just in a matter of months, and how truly devastating the Yuuzhan Vong invasion has been to it. Millions of the inhabitants of Coruscant have died because very few people were able to escape during the events of Star by Star. And the Yuuzhan Vong aren't just tearing down the buildings and removing the technology around them, they're also altering Coruscant's orbit and changing how the planet behaves. Wraith Squadron's able to make contact with a group of survivors, but they slowly come to realize that their mission has to change. Coruscant won't ever possibly be able to return to what it once was. So rather than helping the people and letting them know that the New Republic forces will be back soon, it's more teaching them how to survive in a threatening, dangerous alien environment and hold out for a span of time that no one knows how long that will last. And while they're there, they discover a threat in its way perhaps worse than what the Yuuzhan Vong are doing to Coruscant. They discover Lord Nyax. In keeping with the vision that Luke saw of Coruscant, there is a being on Coruscant, a dark side being, who's not really doing some good stuff. He has the ability to manipulate people. He's very strong. And he's after something that for most of the book remains unclear, some source of power or some goal he's working through that the reader and the Jedi Wraith Squadron strike team aren't quite aware of. Luke comes to some revelations, mainly that the Jedi's role is to stand firm. And in some cases, that does mean action, because if you're standing against an opposing force, You can't just stand there passively. You do have to take an active stance at some point. I felt like on the whole, Mara's portrayal felt a little cold compared to previous books. And that might just be her feelings regarding her absence from her son and uncovering Vicky Sesh's presence on Coruscant. But it was a little, almost felt like a step back for Mara, back to the scary former assassin, rather than the slightly more open woman we've gotten to know in some of the books. And Tahiri takes an entirely different approach to Lord Nyax's influences, which is that she uses some of the Yuuzhan Vong side of her to be able to counteract it. I wish we could have seen her doing more with that. The idea that she can almost manually cut herself off from the Force because of that Yuuzhan Vong shaping she went through is really interesting, and I would like to see more of an examination into it. It's cool, we haven't seen it before. But I can suppose that as Tahiri's coming to grips with herself and the death of Anakin and everything that's happened after it, she's also coming into better control of her abilities, and we might see more of those. And as ever, the Wraiths are a delight. I love Face. I love Kel. The new Wraiths are fun too, but mainly I love Face and Kel, and I love their banter, and I love that they were having some unspoken competition to see who could stay in their Yuuzhan Vong armor the longest, even though it was uncomfortable, which just feels very much like them. Han and Leia go on 2 missions for the rebel movement. Neither of these missions feel important or like they're moving the plot along, but it was nice to see Leia and Han interact and how much their relationship has improved and grown. Tam Elgrin finds that a lot of people on the base at Borleias do distrust him because of what he did under the influence of the Yuuzhan Vong. He takes little Dab/Tark, the boy that Vicky Sesh made to look like Anakin Solo, under his wing, and he uncovers a spy of his own. And in the end, he and Wolam Sayre and little Tark leave for unknown places, but presumably they're all going to be very happy making holo documentaries together. On the Jaina Jag Kype front, I thought that Jaina still had a lot of issues to work through after Rebel Dream, but it seems like she's not really going to work on them here other than talking to Kype a bit about their partnership. She's good for now. She's in a relationship with Jagged Fell for now, and we'll just have to accept that if there's any further development with her, it will happen in Destiny's Way or the subsequent books. I have to say, Jaina's talk with Kype was very awkward to me, and in trying to pinpoint what made it awkward, I think it was the presence of Jag. I know that it was Jag's idea to talk to Kype, but I really feel like that should have been a private conversation. And I have to say, for most of the book, I really wanted more Wedge and more Tycho. I love Wedge and Tycho. In the very beginning, we got to see them interact with Wes Jansen, and just the presence of Jansen being there made me so happy. But then it didn't feel like we saw a lot of Wedge until the last 70 pages, but boy, did the last 70 pages make up for that. My favorite bits have always been when Wedge has to use his skills or has to use his intellect to get himself out of an impossible situation. And that's exactly what happened in the end of the book, but we will also put a pin in that and return to that. And on the Yuuzhan Vong front, we have Savon Law absolutely realizing that there is a plot between the Shapers and the Yuuzhan priests against him. Thanks to the help of Nenyim, he's able to uncover it, and they are all killed by Rancors, because apparently death by something Yuuzhan Vong is too good for them. So he's got that problem sorted at least. He's not going to be a shamed one. He's not going to lose his rank. Vicky Sesh is assigned to the warrior Danuaku to track down the Jedi on Coruscant, and in typical Viki manner, she manages to run off several times. She finds herself an escape ship, and the Wraiths and the Jedi steal it from her. So Viki doesn't want anyone else to kill her. Viki wants to choose her own death, so she throws herself out of a window and dies. I do find interesting is the War Master's father, Commander Czulkang Lah. He continues his barrage against Borleias, but he and the world ship he's on, one of the few healthy world ships, are destroyed precisely because Wedge gave him false information. Part of Wedge's plot was to hide what he was really doing and to make it really obvious what he wanted the Vong to think he was doing. And despite himself, Czulkang Lah falls for it. I also liked his death. I liked his last words, and then that he wouldn't speak to anyone else on his ship because he said it was his last words. I just wish we could have seen more of him, but I will put a third pin in that and return to it. So my biggest issue with Rebels Stand was how the Wraith Squadron Jedi mission to Coruscant seemed to overshadow almost everything else in the book. For the first 300 pages, we keep cutting back and forth between the different subplots, but we cut back to Coruscant a lot because there's a lot going on there. There's all the revelations about what's happening to the planet. There is their attempts to contact survivors, and then there is their discovery of Lord Nyax and their increasingly desperate attempts to stop him and to stop what he's doing. My problem there is that Lord Nyax feels a lot like one of the bad guys from a horror film to me, in that he's very effective when we only see a little of him. But once we see more of him and once we learn his backstory, he just starts to feel a bit goofy to me. I love the scenes from his point of view, how he's trying to get into this wall, but he can't communicate. He can only communicate by pushing thoughts into other people's heads. He doesn't even have a name. The name he assumes is a name that they gave him, a name of a nightmare from the Corellian system. He's completely nonverbal, and his sense of understanding is incomplete and warped. And so he's really interesting, the idea of him. But then when we find out that he's Eirik Ismarin, that he was made to be 3 meters tall, he has armor embedded under his skin, and he's got lightsabers just like stuck on him, so that he looks somewhat like this picture. This picture makes it look like he's completely wearing armor, but he's not. He's still identifiable as Eirik. He's like a proto-General Grievous. And his backstory is very sad. The idea that he essentially died. He was brain dead. So she tried to remake him. She tried to turn him back into her son. But she failed, and he killed her. And he has no idea who he was. He has no idea what he should be doing other than this embedded sense of seeking out places of power and taking them over. In the end, he does feel a bit overpowered to me, being a 9-foot-tall man with like 8 lightsabers coming out of his body at various places. They're able to defeat him precisely because he is untrained. He woke up when he wasn't supposed to, and so he's just sheer instinct. The more we learn of him, the more odd he is. And so it gives that whole Coruscant mission sort of the feeling of a wild goose chase, like we just went off after a red herring. But in a way, I guess that was the point of the Coruscant mission, that things have changed. They can't retake it because it won't be the same. And I said that was my biggest issue, but in a way, the last 70 pages of the book made it less of an issue than I thought it was going to be. The final Battle of Borleias is so good. I love getting to see the culmination of all of Wedge's plots, both the one that was obviously fake, Project Starlancer, and the one that only a very select number of people knew about, Operation Emperor Sphere. I just really love whenever someone in Star Wars thinks about the space navy and then uses them like a navy. Just the concept of turning the Luzankia, which at this point was possibly too damaged to repair, into like a giant battering ram that just rams its way into the world ship and destroys everything, was so good. I love Wedge's escapades as Black Moon 11, that he stayed on the base the longest he could, but then his only way off is an X-Wing that frankly doesn't function very well, does not have an astromech, and does not have a working comm unit. So it's Wedge single-handedly protecting a freighter against an entire squadron of coral skippers. And I enjoyed getting to see the other aspects of the battle, how the Errant Venture got all those weapons and the Yuuzhan Vong were completely unaware of that. Booster is probably very happy. How the Twin Sun Squadron were able to do a ploy with a missile that had the same gravity signature of Jaina's X-Wing and were able to, take out a number of coral skippers in the process. Mostly I just love that Wedge was able to hold Borleias for so long, and then when he decided to leave, they made the Yuuzhan Vong really regret ever attacking it in the first place. With that said, I do wish we could have seen more of Czulkang Lah, though. The dynamic between him and his son was very interesting, and I wish we could have seen more about why he didn't want to invade the galaxy far, far away. What were his thoughts on that? If he wasn't stuck in this framework of having to obey orders coming from his son, the War Master, would the Battle of Borleias have gone any differently? It seems to me that the only reason the Yuuzhan Vong have triumphed so far is just through sheer numbers. They have a few good strategists, but it seems like they rely overly on the Yamisks and external forms of controlling and ordering their troops. And when that falls apart, or when they lose their good strategists, it just falls to pieces. Their warriors, even under the best of times, won't take orders, will take off because they want a duel or because they want personal glory. I think, and I hope the later books will show how the loss of their good leaders just really make their invasion efforts fall apart, because at their core, and I think this comes down to their culture and their religion, they're undisciplined, they seek out death and harm more than they should, and they just don't think about strategy enough. What I find most interesting is that more so than any of the three preceding duologies, the Enemy Lines duology really felt like one continuous story to me. Rebel Stand picks up not long after Rebel Dream ends. You really have to read Rebel Stand to get a sense of how everything is going to finish and culminate and come to fruition. I guess in that way it's hard for me to judge them as individual books, because you have to read both. You have to read the setup and you have to read the conclusion to really get a sense of what Allston was doing here. There are definitely parts I can nitpick at, but I just love how things turned out for our heroes, that they got such an overwhelming win. I loved the spurts of humor we got throughout, and I liked some of the insights we got into characters and into situations. On the whole, I think the weakest part of Rebel Stand for me is that I wanted more. I wanted more with characters. I would have loved more with some of the subplots before the final battle, because it did feel a little heavy on the Coruscant mission. But on the whole, the Enemy Lines duology has been a very nice change of pace after all the angst and drama that preceded it. So next time I'm going to be reading the Jason-centric novel by Matthew Stover, traitor.